Today on episode 82 of Rail Talk, Natalie Voss, editor-in-chief of the Paulick Report, stops by to discuss the New York Times piece and all the goings-on in horse racing. I'm Joe Bianca. I'm an ownership advisor at West Point Thoroughbreds. And John, since you've wrapped up pretty much the Derby contest, are you setting your sights next on an Oscar or an Emmy or an I mean, you got it all covered, buddy.
Well, listen, when you look like this and you sound like this, the world's your oyster. I mean, you have every opportunity possible to get every award possible, including a Razzie. Jonathan Green, general manager, DJ Stable, and Joe, I had to actually buy a set of binoculars just to be able to see you guys in my rearview mirror in this contest.
Usually John needs to get on a ladder to see us. This time he needed binoculars. Got him. Got him back. The opinions expressed on Rail Talk are those of hosts Joe Bianca and Jon Green and do not reflect those of anybody we work with or work for. Rail Talk is sponsored by Epic Insurance Brokers, one of the nation's top retail insurance brokers providing expertise across key lines of insurance, including property and casualty, employee benefits, and unique specialty insurance. Our buddy Chris Moore leads Epic's equine specialty practice. You see him at the sales, races, horse racing, Twitter, etc. He has horses himself. This is his passion. He has a few things that you might want to know when thinking about insuring your equine investment. Many more equine mortality policies renew around yearling sales time. So most of you listening are already halfway through your policy. The halfway point is a good time to review your current insurance plan to make sure it's working the way it's supposed to. Do you need to update horse values? This is something that happened with Sandman. Where do you stand on your deductible? With 2-year-old sales coming up, how will buying, sell, or selling impact your policy? Give Chris a call. Shoot him a text at 317-650-4519. He's going to be in Ocala for the March sale, as will me and John. If you want to sit down and do a review, reach out to set something up with our buddy Chris. And that brings us to this week's
Epic Performance of the Week.
And Joe, some of us that manage horses like you and myself, we dream to win a couple of races a weekend. But how about an organization that won maiden special weight race, first time starter, a grade 3, a grade 2, and a grade 1, all within 24 hours of each other? I mean, it is just unbelievable. And that mantle belongs to Eclipse Thoroughbreds. Our friend Aaron Wellman, friend of the show, had a year in a day. It was unbelievable. First, he had, in no particular order, Valentinian, who was a $1.5 million phasing August purchase that won first time out with a 79 buyer, running 2 turns at Tampa. I'm sure we're going to see him in a Derby prep pretty soon. Vixen, who, I don't know if you know, Joe, but we have a very close connection to Vixen. Oh, yeah, we own a piece of it. Who won the Here Comes the Bride at Gulfstream Park, the grade 3. And then you had, Locked, who won in the grade 1 at Santa Anita, and blinkers on for the first time, won very, very impressively. Oh, and then the last Derby prep of the day, the San Felipe grade 2, we had journalism, who was also a Fasig-Tipton grad of $825,000 at the yearling sale in 2023. Journalism won very impressively, earned all the points there. Sam actually won that, selecting journalism in the Mage Rage contest. So a little more cross-pollination there for you, Joe, between Fasig-Tipton, the Mage Rage, and the Epic Performer of the Week, Eclipse Thoroughbreds. Congratulations to you guys.
So we are so thrilled to welcome this next guest to the Rail Talk studio. We've wanted to have her on for a good while now. Here she is, the editor-in-chief of the Paulick Report, 3-time Eclipse Award-winning writer, Natalie Voss. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, we're so excited to have you, and just in general, but I think especially this week it was really, really interesting and good timing because we saw the New York Times opinion piece on Sunday, not very flattering to the racing industry, by Noah Shackman, and I immediately said to John and Patty, I'm so glad we have Natalie on because I consider you the sharpest critic of the business from within the industry. So I'd love to get your take on this sharp critic from outside the industry. What do you think it got right? What do you think it got wrong? Was it misleading at all? Just give me your first blush reaction.
Well, there was a lot going on in it, right? So it was a lot longer than I would have expected for an op-ed. I just kind of kept scrolling and it kept being more problems, which, is kind of, that is true of horse racing. I think the main focus obviously was the revenue sharing, or not sharing, I guess, but the revenue from casinos to horse racing. And, he didn't do, I don't think, a great job of explaining how those agreements actually work. What I didn't really understand as an initial reader of the piece was like, okay, so, you have this issue with casinos paying a portion of their income towards horse racing, but why are you equating that with like, you should personally be getting that? I now sort of understand that the goal was to talk about the fact that income that gets paid from the casinos to horse racing, in some places at least, is not taxed because it's going to horse racing. And there was the public interest factor. I wasn't quite getting that from the initial read. I'm not sure how many people reading it would have had an appreciation based on that piece for the fact that horse racing does take that money and turn it into jobs and economic impact on the state and the local levels. Obviously, that's why those agreements are in place as far as horse racing is concerned. But I don't think that it's a great thing, right, that horse racing it can't sort of stand on its own without that help from casinos. And we've talked about that internally for literally years. So I was a little surprised at some of the pushback from the racing industry of like, well, this isn't subsidies. Well, I mean, guys, it kind of is. We've been saying that to each other for a long time.
Yeah.
And we've been saying to each other, this isn't a great sign of health of the industry. And it isn't. So he wasn't wrong about that part. And I don't think that he was wrong that it's a little bit on the unusual side for one very successful industry to have to pay to help a less successful industry along. But of course, the horse racing perspective is, well, you're only here because of us, so you kind of owe us. And I can see both sides of the fence on that part. Like I said, I don't particularly grab onto the public impact part because he seems to be making a lot of assumptions about what that money would end up meaning to state governments if it didn't go to horse racing. But he didn't really break down the numbers on that to really convince me that that's a greater public impact versus the jobs. Really, nobody has done that. They've just pointed out that horse racing has a great public impact in terms of the economies it supports. So I didn't read it and think like this is an absolute hit job and none of this is true, because parts of it are. But I don't think that it was presented in the most simple way for a mainstream audience member to grasp the complexity. And I think the other issues that he sort of went through with the breakdowns and obviously the backstretch worker issues are profound and have been profound for a long time. And I think there was sort of a similar treatment of each thing where like, I don't know that this gave the mainstream audience member a fully factual view on the situation, but he's right that it doesn't look good. So that was kind of the takeaway that I had.
Yeah. And there were really, I agree with Natalie, what you're saying. There was a couple of things that I took away from it. Number one is they really did a poor job of differentiating our industry from the standardbred industry and from the quarter horse industry. He was quoting about, he started off the article talking about, how there was nobody there in the stands, and they was talking about standardbreds, and then all the breakdowns, and most of them were actually quarter horses. And he really kind of muddied the waters, I think purposely, to try to make it look like horse racing in general was this evil empire and that we're stealing money from the poor and the hungry in order to break horses down. And that was kind of my initial takeaway. The other was, and I want your opinion on this, the other was like, it was a lot, after I read the article and talked to a couple of people, it was a lot of this, like silence. There was no backlash from the industry. There was no backlash from the public. Do you think that means that there's just apathy and people don't care, or that a lot of people aren't reading the New York Times anymore?
I mean, at the time that I read the article, it had almost 700 comments on it. And if you sort of scrolled through, about maybe 1 in every 50 was like somebody who was interested in the industry or a fan or a participant saying, well, this isn't really the whole story. And that's kind of how it's always been.
Right.
So I didn't see a huge like social media ripple effect among like the mainstream sort of parts of social media that I follow of the mainstream world kind of looking at it and freaking out the way that we've seen them do with other, mainstream coverage of especially the breakdowns issue. And I think that might be why, this was kind of an economic focused piece that did mention the breakdowns, but it wasn't a welfare focused piece. And I think that kind of doesn't get people's hackles up quite as much, but I don't know. I don't think that it did anything positive for racing, just reading through the comment section, but it wasn't any different than it's been for the entire time I've been doing this either. There wasn't much of a response from racing at the time either. I know that Light Up Racing put out some very useful conversation guides and open letters, and both Friday and today, kind of giving people some statistical tools to rebut that with. But I wasn't seeing, at the time I looked at the comment section, I was not seeing people actually do that on the source materials website. I've seen people do that on our Facebook page, but that's not the same audience. So that really doesn't help very much.
Right.
Yeah, well, this is where I wonder what HISA's role can be, because I understand that they are brought in to be a regulator, and I think they've done a pretty kick-ass job of that so far, and I think we're starting to see the results of that on the racetrack. But, in absent a unified PR agency that we hire and, put out on behalf of the industry, I wonder, and first of all, the name itself, the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority, just confers to the audience that we are here to make things right. We are here to get this house in order. So I think that alone, even if people don't know like the what the organization actually does, I think that alone confers credibility. But Natalie, I'm curious, like your thoughts. Do you think that assuming HISA sticks around, do you think that we could eventually branch that responsibility out to do some PR, some communications, because there really is a dearth of that in the industry?
I mean, I wish I thought that was likely on the horizon. I think that they're sort of so bogged down right now with the legal challenges that they're facing. And I would imagine that from the regulatory side, once they get through most of that, assuming that they eventually do, I would imagine there's other regulatory resources they would want to pour their time and money into before they would try to take on some new element of things. But the journalist in me also kind of tends to think like, they're definitely related, the notion of regulation and public relations, but you'd kind of ideally want those to be different entities anyway. Like you'd want any sort of public relations group to be national the way HISA is and to be supported by the different states that feed into it the way that HISA is. But I don't know if you would necessarily sort of in a vacuum want them to be the same, because you'd want them to be able to claim independence of each other. Like, we're not here to tell you our take on the regulations. We're here to administer the regulations. And the PR side should be like, we're here to break this down for you, not to try to intimidate people or put people on the spot or anything like that. Like, we don't do the regulation. Like, it would be nice if ideally they were two different things, but I haven't seen any other sort of successful long-term national effort to do anything like that. Other than HISA doing the regulation. So it's hard for me to imagine how else that would work.
Yeah. And I think Light Up Racing was trying to pick up the pieces like you mentioned and put some sound bites out there and some talking points, I guess is a better way of putting it. So the rest of us can combat some of the negativity. But more importantly, Andrew Cohen from your organization actually just literally came out with a rebuttal of the New York Times piece. And I love the intro. Please give me 4,500 words in the New York Times to rebut the latest overwrought anti-racing article, which editors there signed off on last week. I mean, that is a grabber. I love that piece. Talk to us a little bit about Andrew's piece and what you thought of it, albeit I know it's from your organization. So of course you're going to say great things, rightfully so. But what was kind of the mindset that Andrew had going into it, and tell the the listeners and the viewers about the article. And
Ray's piece too. Ray did a great job too. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So what I really loved about Andrew's piece was that he sort of talked about his different reactions to the New York Times article as he read it through multiple times. Like he sort of, which is true, as you read something over, especially something long and complicated, kind of different things stick out to you and you kind of walk away with a slightly different idea every time. And so he talked through that process a little bit. And I think that he kind of landed in a similar place to where I did, which is like, okay, some of this is kind of not sort of misunderstanding the situation, maybe willfully, maybe not. Some of this is kind of raising important points that we need to be concerned about, but probably raising them to a mainstream audience when it's the insider audience who need to be fixing it. And I think that he sort of came down similarly to what I did, where, as he read through it more times, it was like, yeah, none of this is good. Some of this looks bad and is true, and some of this looks bad and is maybe not totally well explained. Ray more focused on the financial aspect and how he felt that equating the support that casinos give to horse racing with that means the public owns the entire sport is pretty ridiculous. And that did seem like kind of a stretch to me.
Right.
So that was certainly the part that I think the author and New York Times belabored the hardest was, well, this is our sport because we are funding it. And well, no, you're not exactly. So that was a fair thing to grab onto, but they sort of took, they got to similar places, but I think sort of by different routes.
Yeah. I really admire the work you do on Paulick Report because it's so many different topics, so many different subjects that you cover, like down to granular detail. And that's not an easy thing to do, to have expertise on a wide variety of issues. So in saying that, we could talk to you for like hours and hours, but I would love to get your like broad view of the health of the industry, particularly, in the wake of the Florida decoupling measure, because I think that really brought home the existential crises that several places are facing, most notably Florida and California. Two-part question. A, like, how do you see what kind of John and Damon Thayer, they started this great thoroughbred racing initiative to try to, lobby against these bills. But just as as long as the Stronach Group is in charge of these tracks and not showing that much interest in having a racing product, we're kind of still in that position. Let me ask you this first. We're kind of still in that position where we don't have people who are naturally interested in racing owning a lot of these tracks. Do you see any way out of that? Or is this just one of those situations where we're just going to have to contract and have only a few companies in charge of the sport?
Yeah, it's sort of hard for me to imagine a different outcome besides a fairly large industry contraction coming up, probably sooner than I had originally guessed that it would. Because he didn't mention the decoupling thing in the New York Times piece, but when you sort of think about it in a way, they go hand in hand, right? Is like part of the reason that the Stronach Group or First is sort of pushing for the decoupling is they've correctly identified they could make way more money off of casino revenue than running live horse racing if they didn't have to run the live product. And I think that's because for many of these companies, running live horse racing is either not making a profit or not making enough of a profit compared to what else they could be doing. So obviously they're going to want to trend towards that. I think that anybody who is interested in horse racing, who has the money to buy a racetrack, probably didn't get that money by spending it on things that don't bring them enough revenue. So it's hard for me to imagine that somebody would look at the books of someplace like Gulfstream and say, you know what, I'm going to take this on and fight all the uphill battles that the industry is fighting right now in order to make my investment back. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. It'd be great if somebody went in there and bought that and, made it a showpiece for Florida in a way that it hasn't been recently. But it's hard for me to think that somebody with the money to do it is going to be convinced to get in there and get their hands dirty in something that is not making enough money, or else First would stick around, So I don't think that it's, I don't think that it's not profitable, but I do think that it's hard to turn away the idea of casino revenue when that's so closely related. And you can see how they got there, I guess, is what I'm saying. So it's hard for me to imagine somebody coming in and saying, oh no, I won't worry about any of that. I just want to make it a racetrack. Like, it would be great, but I'm just not sure I think that's going to happen.
And I just want to ask the second part of that for a follow-up. Where do you see the industry in like 10, 15 years? Is Florida racing here? Is California racing still here? And then as part of that, if one or both of them go away, do we get to a point where racing is just like in Kentucky and maybe one or two other states?
And Natalie, if you're going to project, where is the Rail Talk podcast 10 to 15 years from now? And that is a third part of the equation. Please, go ahead.
John's hair finally catch up to his beard.
Exactly.
Maybe. I'm not an optimistic person. Anybody who works with me or knows me will probably tell you that. And I think I come by it honestly. I mean, you don't do investigative reporting for 12 years and not get at least a little bit jaded and pessimistic. But the Florida decoupling thing, I know personally, sort of the concepts hit me kind of hard at the start of the year, just going like, oh wow, we're already here. Like, this looks like this might really happen, and that's the end if it does. Probably that's the end if it does for racing in Florida. I've not heard great things about the direction California is going, and it's obviously, and you can see that it's not going too well out there. So 10, 15 years, I don't know about those states still having racing. And what I worry about is if decoupling goes forward in Florida, where else are they going to try it? There's casino companies that are strictly casino companies that own tracks in other states. And they did that in part because they wanted to have casinos there. They've been running it long enough that they've got to also be looking at the books on how much live racing makes versus how much their casino makes. And if they can just sort of get a toe in there and say, well, in Florida, they decoupled and that it seems like that's having benefits for them, then, they're going to try it too. So I unfortunately think there is going to be a really big contraction, and I think it's coming up faster than I had hoped. And as somebody who relies on the industry being the size that it is for my job, I'm really not looking forward to knowing how that turns out. But I think it's kind of inevitable. There's sort of too many different challenges on too many different fronts, for me at least, to think otherwise, sadly. But you guys will be fine. You're really good, so you'll be okay.
Thanks. I appreciate
It'll
that.
just be after the nuclear apocalypse, it'll just be the roaches and podcasters.
And me and Joe.
Exactly. Survive.
Exactly.
You can do it out of a bunker. It'll be fine.
It'll be fine. Yeah. It will be based on cockroach racing, though, apparently. Which, by the way, as an industry is way too inbred. So we need to worry about that as well. But that's a whole nother therapy. That's a whole nother show. Now, I do want to spin back to the New York Times article, because there was something in there that concerned me. Joe and I have talked about it before on the show, and that is the conditions for the employees that are back there. You talk about these massive companies like the First Group or like Churchill Downs Incorporated, CDI, who just put in hundreds of millions of dollars, literally hundreds of millions of dollars of improvements for customer enjoyment and satisfaction. And my understanding is not $1, not one penny was put into the backstretch for the horses or for the humans, that take care of them. I think we have to look at that and address it as an industry as well, because if we can't get top employees or better conditions for our employees, then why should they stay, and why should they take care of our expensive athletes, accordingly?
It's never made sense to me. Like the person who's the first sort of line of communication for the trainer, for the rider, for everybody is the groom that has their hands on the horse every day. And we know how well they know their horses and how important that information is, how important it is for there to be grooms who stick around for many years, for generations, ideally, to pass that institutional knowledge on to others. And the fact that there hasn't been more interest in safeguarding that workforce in a lot of different ways is just, it's crazy to me, because that's critically important. And it's just sort of been puzzling for a long time. I remember the New York Times did a piece, and I should have looked it up before I came on here because I can't remember the year now, but it was fairly early on in my career where they looked at the conditions in the dorms at a NYRA track, and I don't remember if it was Aqueduct or Belmont, but it was not good and not safe, and they had gotten photos from the inside, and it was very difficult for them to get photos because, from what I can recall, there were officials who really didn't want them in there. And that sort of says a lot by itself. And I remember looking at those pictures at the time and thinking, people are going to riot. I mean, you can't house people like this. Like, this isn't okay. This is clearly unhealthy. This is clearly unsafe. Things are really going to change. I will say that John Hendrickson and Mary Lou Whitney put a lot of money into new dorms in the NYRA system, especially at Saratoga, but I think elsewhere also. In the wake of that. But there wasn't the big sort of push I'd expected from the public, the exterior public especially, to really advocate for better conditions, better pay, all that sort of stuff for the people who were responsible for these $1 million animals. And it was sort of disappointing, because I was looking forward to things really changing for them, because they should, but that didn't pan out that way. So I was not sorry that he brought that up. It's a legitimate point.
Yeah, no, it's legit. So let me just spin it to the positive. What good things are we doing in the industry? What things are building blocks that you see for the industry that hopefully 10 to 15 years from now, we'll look back and be like, yeah, that was good that was implemented, or that was sustained, or that was promoted?
Well, I do a lot of aftercare coverage, and I think that the aftercare system still needs some work, but it's come a long way from what it was 10 or 15 years ago. And if it keeps going in that trajectory, that's going to be even more true another 10 or 15 years down the road. The TAA has been able to accomplish its goal of accrediting facilities and making sure that the nonprofits that are asking for donations from the racing public are doing what they should be doing with that money. The RRP has accomplished its goal, I think, of increasing demand for horses right off the track. I have an off-track horse, and I board him at a barn with a lot of other people who have off-track horses. And so I kind of know from the inside, like, the price of a sound horse that's recently retired, that's eligible for the thoroughbred makeover, went up several years ago, and it has not come back down. And that's good. So I think that, the aftercare system is dealing with a lot of different challenges, but is continuing to handle the ones that it's got in hand pretty well, which is good. I'm encouraged by the fatality numbers that HISA put out, I think last week or the week before. I'm curious to see what the equine injury database numbers are that cover the whole country, but I'm betting those are probably also down. I'm not sure if they're down quite as much, but that's a good sign too. I do think that, say what you will about HISA and HIWU, they have made some, especially safety practices, more uniform, not quite uniform everywhere, but more uniform than they were. And I think that we're seeing the results of that. So I think that that's going to play out very well down the road when we look back on that in hindsight. And a lot of what I do also is covering equine research. So Grayson Jockey Club Foundation continues to do amazing work as far as research that improves the lives of horses, not just thoroughbreds, but all sorts of horses. I think they're one of the biggest funders of equine research, and that's mostly money coming from horse racing. So if that continues, then we'll have hopefully cures for diseases and better treatments and whatnot, thanks to horse racing in part.
Yeah, no, and I just want to follow up on the fatality data in particular, because HISA gets a lot of credit, but I think it's the kind of thing that it's indicative of an industry that's put horse safety first the last several years, in particular since 2019. And as someone who covers the veterinary side, the medication side, like I said, you cover it all, but I think those are two of your real strong suits on the reporting side. Have you seen a shift in the culture of racing beyond just the additional oversight? Like on the backstretch with the vets, have you seen them change course and kind of keep the main thing, as they say?
So it depends. I have somewhat. It depends a lot on where somebody is. So the people in California that lived through that spike at Santa Anita are very aware of not just the ethical need to put horse safety first, but also the public perception requirement that we do. So I think that people who are kind of on the veterinary and the training side, people who interact with that region a lot, are also kind of feeling that pressure. I think people who were maybe at Derby 2 years ago are a little bit familiar with it. So if you've kind of been someplace where you've lived through that public focus on safety, then I think that people have come away with a greater sort of, if not respect for social license, then at least appreciation that you can't ignore it. But I do still see the attitude of like, well, who cares what the public think? They don't understand this anyway. And that seems to come from states where the racetracks are smaller, they're a little bit more siloed, they're maybe not as sort of interested in kind of the public discourse beyond the racing world and the racetrack that they're at all the time. And so I get frustrated when I see some of that, because I'm thinking like, how many times do we have to almost get banned somewhere before you're going to take this seriously? Like, it doesn't really matter what you think. It matters what the world thinks, because there's more of us, or more of them than there are of us.
Right.
So that always frustrates me, but I don't see that attitude everywhere anymore. And I think that probably was true. Like when I very first started, like maybe 10, 15 years ago, I think that was more universal of just like, oh, well, who cares if people don't like it, they don't get it. And I think that has evolved a little bit, which is a good thing.
You've only been doing this for 10, 15 years. You've already won 3 Eclipse Awards.
I know,
like,
we're way
I'm
behind.
trying to remember how many years it actually is. 12, I think.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
Yikes.
That is remarkable level of achievement for that amount of time. Natalie, this was so much fun. Thank you so much for making the time.
Absolutely.
Like I said, greatly respect your work, and you're even better, not better, but you're just as good on camera too. So we appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really enjoyed it.
Rail Talk is sponsored by TaylorMade, the worldwide leader in thoroughbred sales, marketing, and horse care. Family owned and operated since 1976. Time is now. If you're trying to get into those yearling sales, those marquee yearling sales later in the year, to hit TaylorMade up, try to figure out where you should place your horse. They'll treat your horse as if it's the most important horse in the consignment. They have massive consignments, but the only reason they have so many horses is because so many clients trust them and know that they're going to market their horse the best possible way. And don't forget to hit up the Stallion roster too at TaylorMadeStallions.com. I think this is going to be a big year for TaylorMade Stallions, because they got a couple of freshman sires who are going to have their first 2-year-olds on the track, including Tacitus, Nick's Go. Really looking forward to some of those horses hitting the track. And like I say every week, get in on the ground floor. You're making those breeding decisions. I think a lot of those stallions are going to be higher priced in the coming years, and probably few of them at least go north towards that not this time range. TaylorMade Stallions is on the rise. And of course, on the horse sale and marketing standpoint, they're always the best in the business and the gold standard. Okay, so unfortunately, we're pretty used to this in racing. Stop me if you've heard this before. But there was a scathing article in the New York Times questioning the existence or the necessity of the existence of horse racing. It's 4,600 words. That was the last time you've seen a 4,600 word guest essay. So I'm guessing it wasn't edited down very much. It's called Dead Athletes, Empty Stands, Billions to Keep Horse Racing Alive. Why are we subsidizing this sport is basically the gist of the article. It's by Noah Shackman, who used to be the editor-in-chief of Rolling Stone and the Daily Beast, and now he is a contributing editor at Wired. So I don't know what happened there. I'm not going to be one of these people who's going to reflexively say, like, how dare you? How dare you come into our house and say all these negative things? Like, I don't think it was 100% a hit piece, but it was pretty damn close. He talks about a lot of different issues. He talks about high-profile breakdowns like New York Thunder. He talks about, I think rightfully so, the deplorable conditions of the backstretch for some of the workers in our industry, and I'll get to that in a little bit. He talks a lot about the subsidies that racing gets, a lot of times from other forms of casino gambling, and then he kind of just brushes over any of the positive that racing has to combat that. Like, I think the decreased fatality rate that HISA just reported last week is mentioned in one sentence. Even HISA itself does not really get much of a mention. Now, to me, that's a big part of the story. If you're going to have a 4,600 word article about the ills of horse racing, you might want to mention that there was a congressionally mandated oversight body instituted in the past 4 years in horse racing that has since helped to catch cheaters and decrease the fatality rate and make the sport safer undeniably for all of its participants under its jurisdiction. That was barely mentioned. So to me, it reeks of someone who came in with an agenda. And just full disclosure, I met Noah Shackman at Saratoga when he was following Terry Finley around. Terry had a couple of quotes in the article. And I just got to say one thing. Noah talked to me for a little bit, and he seemed like an okay enough guy. The thing that kind of put me off, that was off-putting to me, is he starts talking to me and he whips out his notepad and just starts writing. Now, I was never a fancy editor-in-chief at a big magazine, but one of the first things I learned in journalism school is that if you're talking to someone and you're going to start taking notes on what they're saying, you ask them, can I take notes? The same way you would not pull out a recorder and stick it in somebody's face without asking, can I record what you're saying? So I just thought that was a little funky, and I can't remember exactly when he pulled out the notepad, but I'm guessing it was when I said one of the things that wasn't quite flattering to the industry. So I have many thoughts about this, and I think several people have responded in a really, really strong, passionate way that I appreciate. Andrew Cohen from the Paulick Report, Ray Paulick from the Paulick Report, Light Up Racing, Bill Finley. We're not going to talk about it a ton because we talked about it with Natalie Voss. I suggest you go read some of those responses. But the thing I'll say is that this is not a charity. This is not, the governments and casinos are not giving us this money just to prop up an industry that doesn't have any business existing. We supply tax revenue. We employ tens of thousands of people across the country, farms, racetracks, veterinary clinics, all sorts of different facets, sales companies of the industry and the agriculture business that are supported by horses and the horse industry. It's just fun. It's fascinating to me in like a publication in particular. Why don't you go talk about Amazon? Why don't you go talk about Tesla and all of the subsidies and all the government contracts that are being handed out to these gigantic companies, as opposed to an industry that's as old as any in the sports business in racing, and has done a lot of good in the past several decades to prop itself up and to get better, especially on the safety side. I just thought it was low-hanging fruit. You know what I mean? Because the New York Times has been negative about racing for a long time, and doesn't have the power that it did. It doesn't have the clout that it once did in the mid-20th century. So it's just so easy because there aren't going to be a ton of advocates. There are not going to be too many powerful people who are leaning on you, telling you not to say this or that. I don't know, John. It just seemed like punching down to me. I know there are rich people in this business. There are some powerful people in this business, but overall, it's a business that's been kicked around a lot, especially by this publication. And to me, it was an unnecessary version of punching down.
Well, it was a hit piece, no doubt about it. Number one. Number two, Joe, it was a hit piece that once he found out that not all the quotes and not all the facts were going to back what he wanted to do, he incorporated other things. And he basically merged together our industry, the thoroughbred industry, with the standardbred industry and the quarter horse industry, and basically painted the picture that all equine industries are one, and that the one industry that dealing with horses exploits the horse, abuses the horse, and on top of it is stealing your money, Joe, taxpayer public, on top of it. So not only are they ruthless and brutal and terrible people, but they're also taking money out of orphans' pockets and out of welfare programs. And that's basically, I think, going into it, what he wanted to do, what he wanted to accomplish was to come up with a way to serve that purpose. Now, you'd say, why would he, basically ignore details and comments that would change the tenor of the article? Well, Joe, according to Wikipedia, in October of 22, Rolling Stone broke the news that the FBI had raided the home of an ABC producer, James Meek, but left out the detail that the raid was carried out because of child pornography. Instead, that, quote unquote, Meek appears to be on the wrong side of a national security apparatus, end quote, and that the raid had been instigated by the government because of Meek's reporting on national security. Who would do that? Who would do that, Joe? Well, it's no other than our friend Noah Shackman, who personally knows the accused Meek and is considered friendly with him, had personally intervened to remove the charges and rewrote the article to give it a different spin. So the guy, as a professional journalist, the guy has a history of changing the way that he's reporting on things to fit his narrative. And that is ingenuous and quite honestly, it is disheartening that, he needs to sell an article to the New York Times, and he has it in his head that he's going to hit on these points already before he even steps into the industry and starts talking to people or starts doing any kind of insight and reporting, investigative reporting himself. So I really think that those are a couple of things that were going into it as to why there was such a negative spin on this. And Joe, granted, we did not do ourselves as an industry any favors when it comes to horses breaking down, when it comes to where people live on the backstretch. He kind of loosely, he being Noah, the author, kind of loosely insinuated that the trainers are doping horses and are not paying their employees properly, and kind of sprinkled some details in there about Asmussen and some alleged trainers also that were coming in and allegedly doping, I should say, their horses. And he was very free and loose with a lot of those details, which I think, again, it served his narrative, even if it wasn't 100% factual. But overall, I was really disappointed with not only the way that the article came out, but also the fact that, again, it shone light on some things that we need to continue to improve. He did mention HISA. He did mention safety, just to kind of buttress some of his points, like good, bad, good, that type of thing. In a formula, and those things should be highlighted. The other thing that he did, Joe, was he also shone a light on the fact that we still need to have a better PR response to some of these articles and some of these hit pieces. I know Light Up Racing came out with some talking points, and they were certainly helpful, and I thought that they did it on a timely measure. But I'm still not sure that we as an industry shouldn't have a professional PR group to address some of these issues, almost like what we're trying to build with the lobbying group on the racing side. Quite frankly, it's just coming through. So, look, you can take an article like this and go one of two ways. You can ignore it, you can bury it, you can say, the guy was doing a hit piece and hope that it goes away in the next news cycle, which is 24 hours later. Or you can really look at it and say, you know what, there were a couple of points in here. It wasn't the headline points that he was trying to promote, but there are a couple points in here that we as an industry still need to continue to address and improve upon. So that way they can be removed from this negative talk about the industry. But overall, I think he kind of jerry-rigged and fit a square peg into a round narrative. And that's not really fair for any industry.
No, for sure. And I'm going to get into the points that he made that I think are legitimate and that need discussion, because I don't know, if you watched the show before, we're not cheerleaders for the industry. Like we are very critical when the industry deserves it. But I think in a lot of cases, especially in pieces like this, it's taking more of a beating than it deserves.
Right.
And I just think of the headline. Like the headline is so sensational. Right. And like, especially coming from the New York Times, like, how many headlines have they soft pedaled in the Trump era to make it seem like it's not a 5-alarm crisis what's happening? And like, especially like the Israel-Palestine conflict and all those, like they are just so deferential to power when it comes to their headlines in particular. For them to run this headline shows you, I think, what the editorial board really thinks and really wants to convey.
And I'm glad you said that the New York Times wrote the headline, because as you know, being a professional writer, like that's not necessarily one and the same. If you're writing an article, you don't necessarily have the ability to write the headline. So yeah, it was definitely the liberty that they took, on top of that article. I'm sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, no, it's just the guy, they were like, Trump could like literally rip up the Constitution on camera, and the New York Times would be like, an unconventional approach to the Constitution.
He saved paper, right? Exactly.
Just like, give me a fucking break. But I will I want to get to the points that he made in the article that are legitimate. And I think there's two in particular, and one is the condition of the backstretch. And I think there is pretty, I'm not gonna say rampant, but pretty commonplace abuse in terms of the people who are closest to the horse and who have the least power in this business to advocate for themselves. And that's why I think it's a good thing that some local unions here in New York are going into the Belmont backstretch and trying to help them unionize, because a lot of times the backstretch workers do not have a voice. Some barns treat their workers really well. A lot of them really don't, because they're like, sometimes their immigration status might be murky, and they're like, basically have a power over their workers to just keep quiet and just go along to get along. We'll pay you when we pay you. So I think that that's a huge deal and something that we should talk about more on the show, that most people in the industry should talk about. And it's just kind of it's been a silent issue for a long time. And at least I think somewhat is starting to get addressed with some of the Labor Department fines and, some of the attempts at unionization. So I think that that's a huge deal and a very, very fair point that he made. And I wish, honestly, if he just wanted to do a piece about that, and just like talk to backstretch workers, I would have been all for that. Like that's great reporting, because nobody else is saying that. No one else is telling that story. All the other bullshit, all the other stuff that's in the article, like pretty much all of it has been done to death and said a million times before. That's the piece right there. And I would love for Noah or somebody else to go in there and report that story fully, because that is a huge issue. And, for people that are pretty voiceless.
Yeah. And Joe, you mentioned that, and Kim Valerio actually came on our show and talked about the fact that the health issues on the backstretch not only affect the humans that take care of the horses, but also the equine athletes. And I'm sure, I couldn't get a word in edgewise, with Tinky and Ron last week, because they were talking so much about Lasix. But if you're somebody that has issues breathing sometimes. I'm on medication when the pollen blooms and everything like that. It's tough to breathe. It's tough to perform, athletically outside when that occurs. So when you have, barn areas that haven't been spruced up or touched in decades, and the amount of lack of airflow that goes on back there, and the amount of dust and particles, it's only going to affect every athlete's respiratory system, human and equine. So that is definitely something that is part of the rubric as to whether or not horses stay healthy, and need to have Lasix or other medications like that. But I think Kim is the one who's championing that a lot, and has actually met with Churchill Downs on a few occasions to talk to them about, hey, could you maybe take a fraction of what you're putting into the paddock and all the new structures you're building for customer benefit, and satisfaction and enjoyment, and maybe put like a fraction of it into the barn area. Even if you don't want to do it for the people that are working there, do it for the horses, do it for the ones that are actually performing on there. I think it should be for both. Kim thinks it should be for both also. But like, if you don't want to do it as a social experiment, do it because it's only going to help your product, on a regular basis. So I'm sorry, I interrupted you on that.
No, I mean, that's a great point. And Kim has been a champion of that. And I think it's a great point, especially in relation to the amount of money that Churchill Downs is spending to upgrade facilities for basically, let's call it like it is, 2 days a year, maybe 4 if you get the Breeders' Cup.
Yep.
The rest of the year, all those amenities are going to be sitting empty. So 100% there should be a big portion of that investment going to the backstretch. I think the same thing at Belmont too, putting $450 million into this new facility. And maybe they're going there, but the barns to me look exactly the same, and I don't see any construction or anything being done there right now. So I think that's a huge case to make it an interesting story if somebody wants to write it. The other thing, the other obvious salient point that he makes is about the relationship between casinos and states and the racetracks. Now, I don't think that this is like a one size fits all approach. To me, and I was thinking about this a lot, John, what about, because NYRA is thriving with those casino revenues.
Yep.
Like I said, they're putting a bunch of money into capital upgrades. Their product is better. The production is better. There are certain tracks where they're taking that casino revenue and throwing it into the main product. But then there are all sorts of other tracks where they're taking that casino revenue and running terrible products that almost nobody bets on and nobody goes to see. Now, I would love to see a situation where your handle's got to be up to a certain point in order for you to get those casino revenues. Now, it doesn't have to be like 1-to-1 casino to racing. Like, it doesn't have to be that. But I just think there should be a certain threshold that you have to show the industry and the state at large that you're putting effort into bolstering the main product that you're supposed to be in charge of. Otherwise, that subsidy goes away and then that kickback goes away.
Right.
Because what he didn't mention in the story is that a lot of times the casino and racing relationship happens because the racetrack has the gaming license.
Yeah.
The racetrack has the land. They let the casino come in, take some of the land, share in the gaming license, and as a result, they kick back some of that casino revenue to the racing product. And I think that that's a natural, I don't think that's a giveaway. I think that's a natural partnership, the kind you see in business all the time. The question is, what is the racetrack doing with that revenue? And if they aren't putting it back into the product and trying to improve the product and trying to improve safety and handle, then I agree. I think you snatch that revenue away and say, hey, you don't really want to run this business, do you?
Yeah, and that's, I know that relationship is really complex, having seen it in much more detail in Florida. And having thresholds, I think that management wants to have thresholds like that because basically the product is not producing the kind of revenue through pari-mutuel wagering that they had anticipated or they had hoped or that it would be sustained. So management would be for it. I think it would be a detriment to the horsemen. Excuse me, in trying to do it, because I don't think that we would hit certain thresholds, especially with some of the discussions we had previously about these big groups that are coming in and making last minute bets, through the with the cams, the cow
CAW.
Yeah, thank you. As far as how much sway that has on handle. Joe, just as an aside, this weekend at Gulfstream, they were talking about that they were going to have pick 4. There was a pick 4 and there was a pick 5. That was a retail pick 4, pick 5. Does that mean that it was only for people who were on the on?
Yeah,
campus?
It's excluding CAW wagering, but honestly, that's to me making it seem like you're doing something because the CAW, like with the amount of combinations that you can have in the pick 4 and the pick 5 and the pick 6, it's very hard to come in and just crush all of those combinations and depress the payouts.
Right.
Where they're having the effects are in the win pools and the exacta pools, usually where there's only so many combinations. So to me, that's like an ass covering thing that makes it seem like they're doing something about the actual problem.
Yeah. No. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that explanation. I think you bring up 2 excellent points. I'll tell you the third point that I took away from the article was that give the standardbred industry a chance to put their foot in their mouth or their head up their ass, and they are going to respond to it easily. I mean, what kind of quotes did they have to represent the industry? And who's running that insane asylum? I mean, that is unbelievable. You know, the comments and the quotes that they had, that I'm sure that the writer didn't even have to like try to goat out of them. They were like, "Oh, we want to talk about this industry? Yeah, you know, it's kind of like being at a party with a bunch of ugly girls." It's like, are you kidding me? Just how stupid do you have to be in this day and age, especially to say things that are off color? And you're trying to be funny, but it ain't funny anymore. You know, it's just not the right way to do it. And that's your representative as the hierarchy of that industry. Is this knucklehead who's you know, talking like he's still at a fraternity house? Ridiculous.
And the other thing was the way he phrased it too. And to me, this is like symbolic and kind of sums up the entire article. When he talks about the deaths on the racetrack, he goes, so and so many horses were put to death on the track. I'm like, put to death? Were they on trial and then got sentenced for being slow, and then they took him out back and shot him? Like, what do you mean put to death? Like it was somebody had to make that decision because the horse wasn't good enough or something.
Like Caesar was standing there like that.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Like it's like,
no, the horse broke its leg. And he was
like, how can I sensationalize this as much as possible? They put him to death.
Right. Exactly.
Real Talk is sponsored by Facing-Tipton. The Facing-Tipton February digital sale, which we mentioned last week, very, very exciting because it had the 2-year-olds galloping, the first opportunity that I know of people galloping 2-year-olds and being able to sell them this early in the year on a digital platform. Facing is on the cutting edge when it comes to digital sales. The digital sale closed Tuesday evening with 157 horses sold for just under $5 million, a clearance rate of nearly 80%. More than 1,000 prospective buyers registered to bid. So that sounds like a big number to me, especially for February. And the sale topper was one of those 2-year-olds, a colt by Japan, who went for $250,000, purchased by Shane Yeager from the consignment of Demerik sales, first crop of that Grade 1 winning son of Uncle Mo, Japan. So that was super exciting. Oh yeah, New York bred colt too. So we always like to see those. I just, as I mentioned last week, I just think that this is such a great platform for all kinds of horses, but especially for these 2-year-olds who don't necessarily need to breeze an eighth of a mile or a quarter of a mile at top speed, but still have talent, still look good, and their sellers can find a marketplace for them. So that's huge. That's absolutely great that Facing is starting that trend. And I think it's such a trend that will pick up throughout the sales companies and throughout the year. Upcoming on the Facing sale calendar, we have the March digital sale. We have the Sullivan Angel flash sale for the Breeders' Cup winner, which is tomorrow, Tuesday, March 4th. We're recording this on Monday. Then we got the March digital sale, March 13th through the 18th. You can still enter right now for that sale. Then the April digital sale, April 3rd through the 8th. The May digital sale, May 8th through the 13th. And then the next physical sale, the crab cake sale, as we call it at West Point, the Mid-Atlantic May 2-year-olds in training down in Timonium, Maryland, May 19th through the 20th. Get down there for the Undertax show, May 13th through the 15th. It is now time for the Mage Rage Derby contest, quickly becoming my least favorite segment of the show, but not because of Mage and our friends at Airdrie Stud. It's only because Jon Green has gone so far ahead in the standings, but we'll get to that. First, you want to go to Airdrie Stud and check out Mage. If you're making breeding decisions, he stands for just $25,000, even though he was the 149th Kentucky Derby winner. He was the leading 3-year-old of 2023 by earnings, and he obviously is out of the Blue Hen mare Puka, who is obviously the dam of Dornoch as well, and the dam of that really exciting horse Baeza on the West Coast. She's just done an unbelievable job with her first handful of foals, and Mage is just a beautiful, gorgeous specimen, as you can see on the website with that big white blaze. He was fast, he was precocious, he could do it all, and he can do it all for your broodmare band as well. Make sure to check out Airdrie Stud, go see Mage, and go see the rest of that stallion roster, because they do, like I said, I think pound for pound, one of the best in the business on that stallion roster, and we appreciate their support and the support of my guy Mage. All right, I guess let's get to the standings. It was an action-packed weekend on the Derby Trail. We'll talk a little bit about it just from an analysis standpoint as well. But first, let's look at the standings. Jon Green has catapulted to a gigantic lead in the Mage Rage Derby contest standings at 15.2 points. He is nearly 10 points ahead of second place, who is Sam Perry at 5.75, Michelle third at 4.9, Dan is fourth at 4.275. Thank you, John, for doing this divide by 10 bullshit. And I had my 1 week out of last place. I'm relegated back down to last at 3.25. There was a lot of movement. Rodriguez ran third in the decreased points race, the San Felipe, because it was a short field. John had Sovereignty win the Fountain of Youth. Sam had Journalism win the San Felipe. And then Michelle had River Thames run second in the Fountain of Youth. And then Dan had Barnes run second in the San Felipe. John, go ahead, vote.
No. I'm not like that, Joe. I won't step on people when they're down. I'm not the New York Times. I'm not punching down. That's no fun. I will say, however, though, that from a math standpoint, you were wrong. Right now, I'm up by whatever number of points because we divided by 10. I'd be up even more if it was multiplied by 10, if it was the actual points themselves. So, be careful what you wish for. Just be thankful that there's still crumbs on the ground for you to nourish yourself on.
They're just multiples. They're just multiples of each other. It's the same thing.
Well, you know what you have to look forward to, Joe, is that you can have the number one pick on the second round of the contest, which is coming up very quickly. It's only like 2 weeks away.
I'm banking on that because otherwise you look at my team and it's basically just Sandman. Sandman is the only one who I have hopes for until we do that supplemental draft. But it was, I mean, those were two really impressive performances. Journalism in particular got a 108 buyer in the San Felipe. I didn't see that coming. Like, I had my doubts about Barnes stretching out to 2 turns, and I think he probably is still a nice horse, but I just don't want him going 1.25 miles. But I don't think he was like particularly stopping. I thought Journalism came and got him and ran away in the stretch. I don't know, John. Like, does this reset the market for you in terms of 3-year-olds? Is he now the horse to beat?
I mean, I think that Journalism has always been a nice horse, and that he just proved himself that much more, in the San Felipe. I mean, he ran by those horses not like they were standing still because they were motoring, but he definitely improved as the distance got greater. Don't forget, this is his first race of 2025. He hadn't run since mid-December, so he was literally knocking the rust off, not literally, but figuratively knocking the rust off for this race, and maybe hasn't even peaked yet. But Joe, no discredit to Barnes or Rodriguez, because they on buyer numbers, they actually ran better numbers than the winners of the Fountain of Youth and the Gotham. So if it was for different placement purposes, again, everything being equal, they also ran pretty impressive races as well. Would I want to trade for them? I don't know about that. But Journalism was so impressive. I thought Sovereignty ran a huge race in the Fountain of Youth also. Some people are saying that it had less to do with River Thames maybe thinking that they won and kind of slowing it down at the end. But I really think that Sovereignty ran a huge race in the Coolmore Fountain of Youth. And the races in New York, I thought were interesting from a buyer standpoint, from a speed figure standpoint. On the eye test, I don't know if Flood Zone, if I would, necessarily take Flood Zone or Sand Devil, respectively, over any of the other horses that are in the contest or that are in the top 20 in the points. But Flood Zone ran a 98 buyer, which is still a really good number, especially at this stage of the game. But overall, if you asked me, hey, who was the most impressive? Journalism was the most impressive, and I think he ran the fastest buyer number in that race since California Chrome. I mean, it went back over a decade since then. But he is a really super horse and proved it, albeit in a short field.
Yeah, and I read that it was the fastest buyer number that wasn't in one of the final preps.
Right.
In like at least 10 years. So that was crazy impressive. And I stand by what I said. I think it's been borne out. We talked about this in like December, how strong of a crop this looks like.
Yep.
Last year was a really strong crop at 3-year-olds. And I said like November, December, just from the 2-year-olds I was seeing, this looked like a really strong crop too. So I hope we don't have those people who are, habitually every year complain about the weakness of the 3-year-olds, because this looks like a really, really good crew. And I'm interested to see the next Derby future wager, how that shakes out. Because you still got 2 months to go. Today is officially 2 months until the Derby. The Derby is Saturday, May 3rd. We're recording this on Monday, March March 3rd. Let me look at my calendar, make sure I'm right about that. Yes, I said it with confidence because I was right. 2 months away from the Derby. Cannot wait. It's only going to get better from here.
Yeah. And Joe, one more thing, just while we're talking, just to throw in our other sponsor, Aryan Pedigrees, who I know, we're putting up the pedigrees of some of these winners. Did you know that this weekend, Vixen, Sovereignty, Journalism, and Flood Zone were all the first stake winner of their respective mares? So, when people look at catalog pages, and again, we're showing them right now with Arian's pedigree analysis, or pedigree products, when you look at these horses as yearlings and 2-year-olds, it's not just, there's so much black type in here that I should win. It's what you think you can project to. The fact that there were 4 graded stake winners, a couple of them that are on the Derby campaign, that were their first stake winners for each respective mare, that goes to show you that you can find a good horse pretty much anywhere.
Rail Talk is sponsored by the Green Group, the #1 accounting firm in the horse business. Obviously, you know why they're #1. No other CPA firm knows the horse industry like they do. Len and DJ Stable have over 200 horses. They won over 2,500 races, got close to 1,000 clients in the horse business. And there's a special offer for listeners of Rail Talk, and many, many listeners of Rail Talk, just like you, have taken advantage of this offer already. There's a complimentary, confidential half-hour consultation in it for you, where Len guarantees you'll get value if you call him up. And what's that number, Michael?
732-634-5100. Green Group.
Or go to greenco.com. Tax day is right around the corner. It's already tax season. Tax day is about 6 weeks, 7 weeks away. So definitely hit them up. Take advantage of that offer right now. And here's another satisfied customer of the Green Group who has taken advantage of their expertise. Eclipse Award-winning trainer Todd Pletcher.
Green Group has been doing our taxes for about the last 5 years. The Green Group was highly recommended to us by the McLaughlins, Karen and Letty. We were sort of in a transitional stage with our accountants, and we had someone who we'd been with for a long time, and we were kind of having trouble finding the exact right replacement. And the thing that was attractive about the Green Group to us is their familiarity with horse racing. And, so that we found that their knowledge of the horse industry has been very helpful to us. Well, I think what the Green Group can offer you is their knowledge of the business, some, tax incentives and certain areas of the business that apply only to horse racing. So it's great to have a group that's familiar with the horse racing aspect, and particularly as a trainer, gives you some additional write-offs and look at some things from some different angles than maybe a group that is not familiar with horse racing.
Thank you, Todd. Do I owe Todd an appearance fee or something for that? That's big time. But honestly, he would only do that if he was telling the truth, and that Len Green and the Green Group have helped him out, and they can help you out no matter what your participation level is in the business. Len can help you take advantage of the tax advantages, the tax benefits, the tax breaks, etc., to make this a more profitable venture for you. He's done it for hundreds and hundreds of people in the business. He'll do it for you too, not just because you're a Rail Talk listener, but especially if you're a Rail Talk listener. Call them up at 732-634-5100 or go to greenco.com. All right, so that's going to do it for episode 82 of Rail Talk. Thank you to Natalie Voss for coming on and having such a great conversation with us. Can't wait to have her back on the show. You can obviously see her work at the Paulick Report, where she's the editor-in-chief, or you can follow her on Twitter at FlySoFree. Thank you, Natalie, for stopping by. Thank you to my co-pilot, Jon Green, our producer, Patty Wolf, our associate producers, Julia Agresta and Nathan Wilkinson. Thank you for tuning in. We won't be here next week. We are off next week. John and I will both be down at the sale, so we'll be back in 2 weeks with episode 83 of Rail Talk. See you then.